Dana White's interest in the UFC has obviously been dwindling, and it looks as though Dana White is going to be leaving the UFC by the end of the year. UFC fans have been pointing out that we are in the Great Depression of the current MMA era because we have such weak cards these next few weeks. UFC 315 turned out to be a great card with a Fight of the Year candidate main event, but the card quality overall, as far as name value goes, was relatively low. This next week, we still are in the apex for some reason I don't understand. We have Gilbert Burns, a former title contender, big name in the division. Jack Della Maddalena just got a title shot off of beating him, going up against a 17-0 prospect that could be the future of the division, possibly the future of the sport. He's just relatively slept on. That's at the apex. And then we have a women's main event in the apex, followed by a okay pay-per-view at UFC 316. So we have that information to deal with. And then we also have the fact that Dana White was not at the UFC 315 press conference last night. We have Dave Shaw who did it, which means we were going to get nothing of value out of the post-fight press conference. Dana White's done this before. Dave Shaw has done multiple UFC post-fight press conferences for pay-per-views at this point. Now, there's obviously potential that Dana just didn't have answers and didn't want to be in front of the crowd, but there's so many other things going on with Dana White that suggest that he is on the way out of the UFC. Another one being the UFC seems to be sliding just a little bit. Maybe we can change the direction of this by booking some super fights like Makhachev Topuria, Jones Aspinall, the whole 9 yards. But they struggled to sell tickets in Canada. This was 3 days before the event. Over half the seats were available. About 30% of the seats were still available. I don't see them advertising a sellout for this event. And when you consider some other things going on in Dana White's life, it seems as though we are nearing the end of Dana White being in charge of the UFC because we have him opening a new boxing promotion with the Saudis, with Turki Al-Sheikh, where he is going to be promoting Canelo versus Crawford at Allegiant Stadium later this year, a stadium show, which Dana White says he absolutely hates. But Dana White is now in the boxing world, which was his baby. He wanted to be a boxing promoter before an MMA promoter. He is also deeply embedded in politics now with President Donald Trump, and he also joined the Meta board of directors. So Dana White seems to be having some massive things going on in his life that are not UFC. Some of them are combat sports related, but at the end of the day, it's not UFC related things. Another reason on top of all of this that I just gave you as to why Dana White is going to leave the UFC this year, he's got Hunter Campbell, his right-hand man, doing most of the negotiating. This was him in Dagestan just last week, reportedly negotiating some sort of fight for Islam Makhachev, whether that be Ilia Topuria or a double champ status fight against Jack Della Maddalena. We have umpteen reasons to believe that Dana White is leaving the UFC. Now, let me tell you what I think. 2025 is Dana White's last year with the UFC in a very involved daily operations type of role. In a very Vince McMahon type of way, he's going to have a hand on everything because Vince McMahon is technically not a part of the leadership for TKO or WWE, but they say that because Triple H, who is his son-in-law, is involved in the management, he's the chief content officer, whatever, that Vince still has a heavy hand in the storylines and who wins and what the next push is as far as storylines go for WWE. I think Dana White's going to be in a Vince McMahon type of position with UFC where he's deciding what the big fights are, but he's not doing much else. Or they ask him for his advice if they need something resolved, or Alex Pereira, John Jones, Conor McGregor, those type of negotiations Dana will be involved in. But Dana White's going to leave, okay? Hunter Campbell is running the UFC at this point. They use Dana White as a front man, but really Hunter Campbell is running the UFC at this point. If you follow the sport closely enough, you know that Hunter Campbell has been running the UFC for quite some time. Now, Hunter Campbell needs to make a splash as the new front man because it's very obvious that he's going to get past the torch when Dana White leaves, and that's most likely towards the end of this year or beginning of next year. Hunter Campbell needs to make a splash. That's why they're pushing him, showing, look, oh, he's in Dagestan negotiating fights, which is good, but Hunter Campbell's going to need to get these super fights booked for if anybody's going to be on his side, because the fan base as a whole relatively loves Dana, and they definitely want somebody like him in the same position, unless they're going to go just full corporate with suits, no emotion whatsoever. But I think having that sort of involved person as someone that's involved in the decision-making of the promotion, that knows the business and is respected amongst the media and fan base, such as Triple H running WWE now. The reason Dana White is going to leave is because all of the things I just mentioned at the beginning of this video, but also the fact that they're going to be getting a massive streaming rights deal at the end of this year. They're negotiating with Netflix, Amazon. They're still negotiating with ESPN. But the rumor is that they're looking for $1 billion a year for 8 to 10 years. Over $1 billion a year for 8 to 10 years. If that's what they get, Dana White can walk away, for the most part, walk away and have no stress about the business and the brand that he built crumbling, because they're going to have such a lucrative streaming deal for the next 8 to 10 years. And Dana White's in his 50s and has said he's never going to retire. So if Dana White over the next 5 years, by like 2030, sees that the UFC is not being run well by Hunter Campbell, he still has the age and experience to be able to come back into the company and right the ship. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to see Dana White officially relieving himself of most of his UFC duties, passing those off to Hunter Campbell. Dana White's going to go off and do his political stuff, the meta board, all these different celebrity businessman type of things that Conor McGregor does, just obviously on a much less unhinged vibe. But that's what Dana White's going to do. They've built him up as this celebrity personality from the beginning. He was the front man of the UFC. They did not go the NFL, NBA route where they had a very clean-cut commissioner. They had Dana White talking to media, meeting with fighters, on stage for press conferences, being next to celebrities as much as possible. They built him into this star, and that's what he's going to go off and do. If the UFC needs him, he'll come back, but this is probably the end of Dana White in the UFC. I'd say we got 6 to 7 months left with Dana White in his current role. Now, does this mean the UFC is going to slide? Absolutely not. Hunter Campbell's young. He's been around the business for years and years. And in my opinion, Dana White's been grooming him to take his spot for at least 5 years now. If Dana White is starting to step away, that tells me that Dana White feels comfortable with where it's at. And if Dana White is comfortable with where the UFC is at to walk away, I'm pretty comfortable with it as well. Like, I'm comfortable that the sport that I make videos about, the company that I make most of my videos about, is going to be in good hands. And they're going to get a huge streaming rights deal, which is just going to grow the sports fan base even more. Good news for me, good news for everybody. Although sentimentally, it'll be tough to not have Dana around at press conferences and all of that. But in the long run, it's probably better for everybody, because Dana White's ego makes it so that he doesn't want fighters getting bigger than the UFC. They learned their lesson with Conor. A new person in charge very well might allow these fighters to become massive stars. We need to find a healthy middle ground between what the UFC is right now and boxing is, because the UFC is much bigger than the fighters. The brand is way bigger than the fighters or the promotion. Boxing, the fighters are way bigger than the promotion. And so the promotions have to pay 30, 40, 50 million dollars to get these guys to sign fight contracts. Whereas in MMA, you're almost nothing monetarily without the UFC logo on your shorts. There's no 7-figure paydays being passed around in PFL or anything like that, unless you're Francis Ngannou, and the UFC is what gave him that value. So we have to find a healthy middle ground, and maybe Dana White being out of the sport is potentially good for that. I think it's safe to say the UFC's in good hands, but Dana White will be gone by the end of this year. Mark my words. Did you like this video? Then like and subscribe down below. I also do multiple live streams per week, along with behind the scenes content and members only live streams for our channel members. So become a channel member for access to bonus content. It's only $5 per month, and it greatly helps the channel's growth. I also do a podcast with my best friend Bo, and I have a non-MMA channel as well called Wyatt's World. You can check both of those out, linked below.